Life has a way of testing our trust in the people we love most. We believe in their loyalty, and we share our deepest thoughts, dreams, and vulnerabilities with them, never imagining that betrayal might lie ahead. But sometimes, one selfish act can unravel everything. The very people we trust can become the source of our greatest pain, leaving us lost, hurt, and questioning everything we once held dear. What you are about to hear is a story of such betrayal and loss, a reminder that even the most loving relationships are fragile, and one wrong decision can alter the course of our lives forever. I ask you to listen carefully, as this is a painful story, one that echoes with the truth of how easily trust can be broken. We often never see it coming, but the wounds that follow can last a lifetime. Paul was a simple man, a hard-working mechanic who dedicated his life to his family. Every day he would rise before the sun, his hands covered in grease, working long hours to ensure his wife, Sarah, and their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, never wanted for anything. He was the kind of father who would spend his rare moments off teaching Emma to ride her bike, and the kind of husband who, even after a grueling day, would sit down beside Sarah on the couch and ask her about her day, always eager to connect. Their home, though modest, was filled with laughter and love. Mornings were spent in a rush of breakfast chaos and school preparations, and evenings were cozy, with Sarah's homemade dinners and Emma's stories about her day at school. In those moments, Paul believed everything was right with the world. But in the quiet spaces between their laughter, Paul began to notice subtle changes. Sarah, once vibrant and full of energy, seemed increasingly distant, often tired and preoccupied. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes, and the long hugs that once greeted him at the door grew fewer. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible, but Paul couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. The night before Paul's business trip, he sat at the dinner table, going over last-minute details. His company had asked him to travel out of state for a few days, a rare but necessary trip. It was an opportunity to advance his career, something he knew Sarah would understand. She had always been supportive of his work, even when it kept him away from home. But as he talked about his plans, he noticed something unsettling in Sarah's demeanor. She didn't seem engaged in the conversation, her responses short, and her gaze unfocused. Paul brushed it off. Perhaps it was just the weight of being a stay-at-home mom, the constant demands of Emma, and the house leaving her exhausted. He tried to tell himself that the distance he felt between them was just stress, a temporary phase. Yet, as he prepared to leave the next morning, something felt off. Sarah barely looked up from her phone as he said goodbye. She offered a quick kiss, her lips cold and her voice lacked the usual warmth. "Have a good trip," she said, but it felt more like a formality than a genuine wish. The unease settled deep in his chest as he closed the door behind him. Something wasn't right. But Paul, trying to ignore the nagging feeling, convinced himself it was nothing. Once Paul left for his trip, the house seemed to exhale a different kind of energy. Sarah, who had once seemed worn out and distant, suddenly became lively and vibrant. She was no longer the tired, stay-at-home mom Paul had known. Instead, she moved with a newfound energy, humming as she got dressed, applying makeup with an unusual care. She picked out a revealing outfit, something far different from the casual, comfortable clothes she usually wore at home. Sarah's actions grew more erratic as she canceled the plans she'd made with the babysitter, opting to leave Emma alone. "I'll be back soon," she promised. But there was no real explanation as to where she was going. Emma, still young and unaware of the growing tension around her, awoke from her nap to an eerily quiet house. She called out for her mother but received no answer. The emptiness of the house swallowed her words. Confused and frightened, she wandered into the kitchen to find something to eat. Her small hands reached for a snack, but in her haste, she slipped on the polished floor. Her fall sent a sharp object tumbling to the ground, and before she could react, it embedded itself into her arm. Emma cried out, but no one was there to hear. Paul had just finished his meeting in New York when his phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. He answered it, expecting a routine call, but what he heard sent a shockwave of panic through his chest. "Mr. Davis?" The voice on the other end was calm, but urgent. "This is St. James Hospital. Your daughter Emma has been brought in. She sustained a severe injury." Paul's breath caught. "What? What happened to her?" "She's been hurt. It appears she slipped and fell, causing a deep cut. We've stabilized her, but it's serious. You need to come quickly." His mind raced, and for a moment, he couldn't process the words. How could this happen?" He stammered, but the voice at the other end kept talking, offering directions and trying to reassure him. In a panic, Paul ran from the meeting room to the nearest exit, his mind screaming for him to be at his daughter's side. As he scrambled for a cab, a terrifying thought began to surface. Why had Sarah been unreachable? Why was Emma alone? A knot tightened in his stomach as his worry shifted from concern for his daughter's injury to suspicion. Why had Sarah been so distant? What was she doing while Emma was left alone to get hurt? His flight back to the airport felt endless, every second pulling him deeper into a spiral of guilt and fear. All that mattered now was Emma. He had to get to her. But the growing dread about his wife's actions only worsened with each passing minute. When Paul arrived at St. James Hospital, the sterile, fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the dread that gripped him. The nurses at the reception desk barely looked up, their faces grim. Something in the air told him this was far more serious than he had imagined. His heart pounded in his chest as he demanded to see his daughter. The doctor who greeted him was soft-spoken, but there was no mistaking the sorrow in his eyes. "Mr. Davis," he began, "we did everything we could, but your daughter's injuries were too severe. I'm so sorry, but we couldn't save her." Paul's world crumbled. His legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed into a nearby chair, unable to grasp the enormity of the words. His little girl, the bright spark of his life, was gone. Standing over Emma's lifeless body in the sterile hospital room, Paul's mind was flooded with memories. Her first steps, the way her laugh could fill a room, the warmth of her tiny hand in his. Those moments, those precious, joyful moments, seemed so distant now, lost forever. As he looked down at her, a crushing wave of guilt washed over him. "If only I hadn't taken that trip," he thought. "If I had been there, she'd still be alive." The weight of the blame felt unbearable. Paul could barely breathe under the suffocating realization that his absence had cost him everything. The following morning, Sarah returned home as if nothing had happened. She walked through the front door, carrying a smile, as though the world hadn't just shattered around them. But Paul could barely contain himself. His heart was still raw from the loss, and the sight of her carefree attitude made the anger inside him explode. Without warning, he stormed into the living room and faced her. "Where were you last night, Sarah?" His voice was low but filled with a quiet fury. "Why was Emma left alone? You weren't even there when she needed you." Sarah froze, her smile faltering. I told you I needed some time. Emma's a big girl. She could handle being by herself for a little while." Paul's chest tightened with rage. "Handle herself? She's 7, Sarah. She was alone when she got hurt, and you weren't there. You left her alone." Sarah's defenses built up quickly, but her words felt hollow to Paul. His heartbreak turned into a fire of anger. "You chose yourself over her. You chose to go out instead of being there for your daughter." The accusation hung in the air. Paul's voice cracked with a devastating clarity as he spat the words, "You killed her, Sarah. Your selfishness killed our daughter." The silence that followed was suffocating. Paul's journey has shown us how a single moment of selfishness can unravel everything we hold dear. One decision, driven by personal desires, can tear apart the fabric of a family, leaving a trail of pain and regret. Let this story be a reminder to never take our loved ones for granted. Every choice we make matters, and its impact can last a lifetime. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts on betrayal, loss, and the consequences of our actions. Together, let's reflect on what truly matters.